West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
As we listen to our readings, we usually add a phrase at the end, offered as wisdom for the journey. And that's an invitation to respond, if you wish, by saying, may we walk in its light. And now the first reading is from Edith Eger, perhaps Eger, on embracing the possible, the choice. Suffering is universal, but victimhood is optional. There is a difference between victimization and victimhood. We are all likely to be victimized in some way in the course of our lives. At some point, we will suffer some kind of affliction or calamity or abuse caused by circumstances or people or institutions over which we have little or no control. This is life. And this is victimization. It comes from outside. It's the neighborhood bully, the boss who rages, the spouse who hits, the lover who cheats, the discriminatory law, the accident that lands you in the hospital. In contrast, victimhood comes from the inside. No one can make you a victim but you. We become victims not because of what happens to us, but when we choose to hold on to our victimization. We develop a victim's mind, a way of thinking and being that is rigid, blaming, pessimistic, stuck in the past, unforgiving, punitive, and without healthy limits or boundaries. We become our own jailers when we choose the confines of the victim's mind. And now the second reading is from Richard Wagamese. All that we are is story. From the moment we are born to the time we continue on our spirit journey, we are involved in the creation of the story of our time here. It is what we arrive with. It is all we leave behind. We are not the things we accumulate. We are not the things we deem important. We are story, all of us. What comes to matter, then, is the creation of the best possible story we can while we're here. You, me, us together. When we can do that, and we take the time to share those stories with each other, we get bigger inside. We see each other. We recognize our kinship. We change the world, one story at a time. And so these readings are offered as wisdom for the journey.
May we walk in its light.
Thank you, Don, for reading so meaningfully. It's almost like we could see the words on the page as you were reading. Thank you for reading from your heart. The song we're going to sing we have sung recently, but I chose it again because I think it fits the theme of the speaker so beautifully. When it comes to the line that, we're saying that just what Don was reading about, that we've all experienced a difficulty, a challenge, a wound, and whoever and however we got back on our feet again. When we come to that line, back, I'm encouraging us to picture people, a person, an issue that did help us or help someone we loved get back on our feet again. Got some smiles in the hall here. I'm sure in the room is, yes, I've needed to get back, and I will. So just that word, back on my feet.
And if you're comfortable, you could get on your feet to join me in singing. If you'd rather sit, that's okay too.
Good morning. I am here to introduce my friend JODIE, who I've never actually met. JODIE and I actually met electronically. I guess it was in 2011 when she contributed a foreword to my book, which I'll read you a passage from in a minute. But I've been aware of JODIE since 2007, and I'm sure part of her story that she'll tell you will tell you part of why she would be familiar. To me, JODIE and I both share that we were employees of the RCMP, and the RCMP made a series of really bad mistakes, and she experienced a real tragedy as being an employee or connected to an RCMP family. And when that tragedy happened, JODIE immediately started to look to make changes in the RCMP, which was something me as a member of the RCMP, a police officer, we weren't allowed to do. We were not allowed to criticize the RCMP. We weren't allowed to, certainly not in the media at the time, we weren't allowed to do any of that. So when this tragedy happened to JODIE's family, we were all shocked, horrified, and we knew it was preventable. And we just knew the RCMP was going to do nothing. And then enters JODIE. And she gets in the media, and she's not mad at us, the RCMP members, but she takes on this policy that is literally killing our members. So, very briefly, the policy was that there was no backup policy, meaning that in the middle of the night, a Mountie could be called from their bed to run out into whatever violent situation. You take the resources you have, which might be you alone, or your spouse at home calling you every 15 minutes to make sure things are okay because your radio doesn't work because you're in the sticks, right? So there was no policy with regards to what's called a backup policy. Then they put the policy in, and then they didn't really follow it. So when JODIE wrote the foreword for the book, she said the following, and this, I think, encapsulates JODIE very well. I became very vocal in the media about the lack of backup policy and the need for the RCMP to keep their membership safer. I wanted the force to move quickly on changing officer safety protocols. I've been asked on many occasions, how can you work for the RCMP after what happened to you? My answer is relatively simple. I want to be part of the solution. I want to make things better. Now, I don't know what JODIE's story is going to continue to talk about, so I don't want to steal her thunder. But based on what she got started, there is now an active backup policy in the RCMP, and we are not going, I haven't been in there like 3 years, but we don't go to calls alone anymore, period. We'll fly somebody in, we'll make the phone call, we'll pay the overtime. And that was very much from, JODIE taking her tragedy literally to the feet of the Prime Minister and saying, you have to take care of this, you have to solve this. So I'm happy to introduce Jodie today. She comes to us with a long history in the RCMP, and she'll give her context, I'm sure. She's a licensed teacher, a certified leader character practitioner. She's a leadership and mental health curriculum designer, and she has trained and coached thousands in her first responder community and beyond. When she wrote the foreword for the book in 2011, I read it and I'm like, I can't wait for Jodie to write a book. And 14 years later, she finally did. And I'm very happy. I got her book, I read it. So I'm looking forward to hearing her talk about her experience, much of which I'm sure is in the book. So without further ado, my friend, whom I've never met, Jodie.
Thank you for that, Aaron. Yes, we have only exchanged over text message and email over the years. I did have the opportunity to watch many of his videos. He's a wonderful filmmaker, a man of many talents, and I'm so thankful that he invited me to speak with you today. I feel so privileged being part of this community this morning. I'll get into a little bit. Yes, my partner, my husband, was killed in the line of duty, which is what started my journey with adversity. And I was raised Roman Catholic, and we were a practicing family. We would go to church either on Saturday night or Sunday morning based on our work and school schedules. But I really had a very difficult time with my faith after what happened to me. And I've been searching for a sense of community since that time, nearly 17 years ago. And just being in your presence today, I feel full and I feel different. So thank you so much for the invitation. I will be back. And this has been more than just an opportunity for me to share with you. I feel like I've already gotten so much back, and I thank you for that. So I'd like to recognize that where I sit in Sturgeon County, Alberta, I recognize that I am on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homelands of the Alexander and Mitchell First Nations, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region Number 4. And I'm so very grateful to call this place home. I've been here for 3 years now, a place where my family and my friends, we can live and grow and create. And I'm so grateful to be sharing this moment with you. As mentioned in the readings this morning, we all have a story, and it's through our stories that we really begin to see one another. And so I'm so grateful to be sharing part of my story with you this morning. So the true part of my experience with adversity started 17 years ago, and I was living in Hay River, Northwest Territories at the time. I was on maternity leave with our 8-month-old daughter, Alexis, from my teaching position. And I was up changing her at about 5:30 in the morning on a Saturday. And I heard a knock at my door. And so I put Alexis back in her crib and I go to see who's on the other side. And it is a friend of ours and Chris's work colleague, Constable Carla George. And she asks me if Chris is home. And I said, no, he was called out a few hours ago. And she said, we can't reach him. So she left and said that she would be in touch. And I went back upstairs because Alexis was stirring. And while I'm bouncing my baby girl on my hip, I'm watching out the front window. And this rising sense of uncertainty is coming up in me. And so I phone my girlfriend, Cindy, who lives down the street, and I tell her what I've learned. And she says she's going to be right over. And so as I'm waiting for her to come, she's walking up my driveway, and then a police car pulls in, and it is Chris's corporal, Mike. And Mike said, we've found him and they've taken him to the hospital. So we get into the police car and we make the 5-minute drive to the hospital. And Hay River's very small. There's only 3,500 people there. And it's very commonplace for people to be injured. The doctors work to stabilize them, and then they're put on an airplane and flown to a hospital that has greater services to get greater care. And so I was fully expecting to be flown either to Yellowknife or to Edmonton in order to support Chris in getting further help. And so my mind is going to, okay, what do I need to do for Alexis? She's going to stay here and I'm going to go and take care of Chris. And so we get to the hospital and we run in and we go to the ER and we're at the nurse's station. And I ask the nurse for a piece of paper because I'm writing down all of the instructions that I'm going to leave for Cindy to take care of Alexis. Mike has disappeared at this point while I'm making the list, but he comes back. And I find myself being led by him by the elbow into a small room off of the hallway. And he tells me to sit down, and then he closes the door behind him and gets down on one knee. And it was in that moment, before he said anything else, that I knew. In that moment, I knew that I was a widow and I had lost my best friend, and that I was an only parent and Alexis would never grow up to know her father. And so in that moment, I was thrust into a reality that I had wanted no part of. And so what I found is that to really understand how far we've come in our lives, it is helpful to go back to the beginning. And so I grew up on a small farm in southwestern Ontario with my parents and 3 sisters. And if the person who is controlling the slides is able to advance to show that image, that would be great. I saw Dawn, you're from London. My parents now live in Mount Bridges. And someone else I saw in Woodstock. I went to high school there. So this is my family. This is me a long time ago. And my dad and my mom, they were immigrants from Europe. I am a first-generation Canadian, and my dad has a grade 8 education. When he was 13 years old, he was told by his father to get a job to support his family. He was one of 14 children. My mom was the eldest of 9. And so my mom and my dad, they marry, and my mom is working as a teacher and my dad is working at building concrete block silos. But he has dreams of building his own business and being financially independent. And with one of my uncles, he started a concrete forming and farm equipment company that was run out of our home. And I remember farmers calling the house at all hours of the day and night and coming into this small front room office dressed in overalls, wearing rubber boots caked with mud and manure, and asking for replacement parts or wanting to rent a cow lifter. And cow lifters were things that we thought were fun as kids because we got to use them as swings. And my dad, he was a visionary. He always had big ideas. And I remember after dinner, he would often leave the dinner table and head into the living room. And he would sit in his lazy boy chair and stare off into the distance, oftentimes with a drink in his hand. And my sisters and I knew at this time there was not to be kid noise around. And so when I was about 8 years old, I remember asking my mom, "What is Dad doing?" And her response was, "He's dreaming." And my dad was such a dreamer that he actually named our farm Dream Fair Stables. My dad seemed to have the ability to look far into the future and picture what he wanted in his life. And that taught me at a very young age to focus on the what and trust the how would follow. And I'd come to rely on this many times over the course of my life. Focus on the what and trust the how will follow. Next slide. I was a sporty kid. And this was an area that made me feel like I stood out a little bit from my sisters. I didn't always feel like I was the prettiest or the smartest or the funniest, but man, I could run fast and track a ball. And while this picture is of me on a baseball team, and I'm going to talk to you about a story that involves me playing volleyball, I wanted to give you a sense of what I looked like at this age. And this was what my mom sent me when I asked last week. So when I was in grade 5, I had made the co-ed volleyball team. And at that age, you were allowed to have 7 players on the court at a time. And that typically meant like 3 in the front row, 3 in the back row, and 1 in the middle. And the rules stated that there needed to be at least 3 girls on the court at one time. And so we were at this tournament and we were all dressed in our red and white uniforms. And a teammate of mine was serving the ball. And before the ball had even gotten over the net, the high school referee blew the whistle. And so we looked at the referee who was looking at our coach, and he said, "Coach, you have too many boys on the floor." And as Mr. Cross started counting and pointing and says, 1, 2, and he gets to me, the high school student says, "Oh, I made a mistake. I thought she was a boy." And in that moment, I shook it off as my teammates laughed and the parents chuckled and the games continued. But that night, I recall feeling embarrassed and frustrated about my appearance. My hair was short. I hadn't started to develop. I had a unisex name that confused people. And so this was the first time that I really remember being self-conscious and that I really started to look around and compare myself to other girls. And all of a sudden, I wanted to have longer hair and I wanted to wear different clothes and I wanted to be noticed by boys, and not just because they wanted me on their cops and robbers team at recess, but because they saw me. I didn't have the wisdom at the time to be able to say to myself, start with the what and trust the how will follow. But looking back, I was able to look around and see the changes that were happening in my older sisters. Carrie was 3 years older than me, and Sandy was 5 years older than her. And their bodies had changed, and they got new clothes, and they changed their hair. And so I was able to look at them and know that if I waited just a little bit longer, that things would start to change for me too. I wasn't sure how I would transform, but I knew that change was coming. Focus on the what and trust the how will follow. Next slide. In my 4th year of university, I was introduced to this beautiful, bald, tall football player named Chris Warden. And Chris and I dated for 5 months before he went to the RCMP Training Academy in Regina, Saskatchewan in September. And that Christmas, when he came home, we got engaged. And at the age of 23 and 24, we were over the moon, excited about our future and dreaming about all of the things that we would do for travel and a large family that we would create. And 2 months after Chris graduated in February, he moved to his first posting in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and I flew to Sydney, Australia, where I earned my education degree. 13 months later, we were married in my hometown of Ingersoll. Next slide. So Chris policed and I taught in 3 northern communities. And then it was in Hay River 1 week after my 29th birthday and the day that Alexis turned 8 months old, that Chris was shot 4 times by a drug dealer and died on duty. And for 5 days, I sat in my house that was filled with family and friends trying to come to terms with this new reality while awaiting news of the killer's capture and planning a regimental funeral. Next slide. So 5 days after the shooting, on the morning that Alexis and I were scheduled to fly to Ottawa, I could feel the emotions starting to rise in a way that was new for me and that I had never felt before. And I asked, well, in fact, I had told the people that were in my house to wait outside in the driveway. So in the middle of October in the Northwest Territories with my friends and family in my driveway, I went to Chris in my bedroom and I took one of his white undershirts and I clutched it and I had that moment. And in that moment, I cried and I screamed and I soaked that shirt with tears. But it was also in that moment that I was able to make a promise to Chris and a promise to myself. And that was to raise Alexis in the way that we talked about, to let her know how much her mom and dad loved her and each other. I knew I needed and I wanted to be strong for Alexis, and I asked Chris for his help. Focus on the what and trust the how will follow. The goal of raising Alexis in a way that would provide her with stability and love and fun and joy and all of the things that we hope children experience in their life, that was what was guiding my choices. And this started with deciding where to live. Next slide. In my mind, I had two choices: either live close to Chris's parents or close to mine. And I chose Ottawa to be closer to Chris's family, as I thought that Alexis could be a healing balm for them. And so by my rural and northern standards, Ottawa was a big city, and moving there was a huge adjustment, especially when I was struggling with my sense of self. I didn't know who I was anymore outside of being Alexis's mom. And simple things like introducing myself to other people was difficult because I didn't know what to say or how to say it or how much to share. And so I just didn't. And I felt like I was walking around with this like large flashing billboard over my head that said, you know, my husband is murdered. I'm an only parent who's struggling. I have no job. I have no friends, and I'm an angry hot mess. And I lived with this perception for a few months. And then as the haze of grief started to lift and I saw that I wasn't keeping the promise that I had made to Chris and to myself, that I actively started looking for ways to be and do better. Next slide. I started to accept invitations for things. I started to talk to people in my neighborhood. I was stepping outside of what felt comfortable for me. And it was through these small acts that I was able to build some connection with new people. And I watched Alexis do the same. So in real time, I'm seeing how my everyday choices were helping me fulfill that promise. The how was taking care of itself, and it continued to evolve. And so my confidence as a mother and as a human was increasing each day. And every day I was distancing myself from the tragedy and moving towards the next best version of me. And I started a full-time position within the RCMP in their learning and development sector. And I made connections with my coworkers. Chantel was a more experienced mom, and so I would often go to her for advice. And Heidi was an Ottawa native, so she helped me navigate the city. And Leanne was a spiritual soul who would talk to me about the purpose of things in my life and meaning. And so these connections and this purposeful work that I was doing was making me a better person and a better mom. And I was building the confidence and setting down new roots. And Alexis was a well-adjusted and happy 2-year-old. And I felt like I was making large strides forward. Focus on the what and trust the how will follow. Next slide. It's been my experience that song lyrics can often feel like they've been written straight from your heart. And this was my experience with Leona Lewis's song, Better in Time. And it helped me give myself permission to move forward in a more empowered way. And so this song played in my head as an anthem when I wanted some reassurance and encouragement to be able to move forward. And so if the technology works, I would like to play a minute of that clip now. And if it doesn't work, I have the lyrics and I can read them out loud. Okay, so I'll read them out loud. And so the ones that were most poignant for me says, since there's no more you and me, it's time I let you go so I can be free and live my life how it should be. No matter how hard it is, I'll be fine without you. I thought I couldn't live without you. It's going to hurt when it heals too. It'll all get better in time. And even though I really love you, I'm going to smile because I deserve to. It'll all get better in time. And so with these words in my head, I gave myself permission to move forward, and I felt lighter, and I was able to breathe deeper than I had in years. And I realized that this was because I had made the choice to let go of the guilt that I had carried, that I was living a life that was different than the one Chris and I had planned when we were 23. And I was able to allow myself to have new hopes that were forward thinking and based on new outcomes. And with this permission, things really began to shift for me. Focus on the what and trust the how will follow. After this realization, you can advance the slide, please. I began dating Brent, and I moved into a new home that was closer to my work, so I was able to spend more hours in a day with Alexis. And I felt like I was leading a life that was authentic and made on my terms. And with these choices, I chose to marry another police officer. I said, you need to have a desk job. I am done with operations. And I was in love, and I was creating a new family of 5. But it was shortly after our wedding that Brent started to show serious signs of declining mental health to the point where he was not able to work. And he medically retired from the RCMP with a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder and major depressive disorder. Add to this, at the age of 9, Alexis came into my room one night crying and said, "Mama, I can't control my equals." And she lives with obsessive compulsive disorder. So navigating the mental health of others, especially those closest to you, is really challenging. And there's unpredictability in mood and behavior, and there's often a breakdown in communication that leads to a desire to withdraw from others, and feelings of helplessness and hopelessness were things that were very strong for me during that time. And these are all things that make a relationship and life harder to thrive in. And so through these years, I really needed to draw on the belief that as a family, we would be able to make through these challenges, and that we would be able to find strength and support to come out on the other side of this stronger. And so I was really focusing on the what as I was trusting that the how would follow. Next slide. Our supports came in the form of family, friends, peers, and mental health professionals. And so all 3 of us had our people, and we were working individually and then collectively to build our sense of well-being. And my therapist's name was June. And June introduced me to the work of Brené Brown and her book, Rising Stronger. And it was through reading that book and identifying that I had a unhealthy relationship with control where things started to really shift for me. And so among the various coping strategies that I explored when I was navigating my grief and then Brent's diagnosis, the one that resonated with me the most was the pursuit of control. And I took great pride in the fact that my superpower was being efficient and effective, and I could project manage. What I didn't realize was that this proficiency was actually a shield that I had put up, and I was limiting myself from embracing my emotions. I was investing most of my energy in trying to orchestrate the outside world and ignoring what was going on inside of me. And with this realization, things really started to transform in my life. It allowed me to stop trying to fix things. And what I realized was it wasn't about perfection, it was about commitment. and commitment to my promise and my goals. Focus on the what and trust the how will follow. Next slide. So day by day, Brent, Alexis, and I continued to show up, and we worked on ourselves and we worked on strengthening our family unit. And there were weeks where the progress was very evident. And then there were weeks where we really needed to look hard to find moments of advancement. But every day we were giving it our best. And every day we were embracing the imperfections. We were letting go of the control, and we were striving to be better. And it was in these moments of perseverance that we were creating the opportunity to learn and to evolve and to foster the strength that emerges when we can embrace hardship and adversity in our life. And we fully stepped into a space of vulnerability and courage. I needed to take a big step into courage in the fall of 2022. I had gone for my yearly mammogram, and the doctor noticed some calcifications. And so I was sent for an ultrasound and then a vacuum biopsy. 10 days after I turned 44, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Life-altering news tends to come to me in October. The day I had found out the news, I had gone to the doctor's office alone. And so I walked out of his office and I sat in the car, and a girlfriend of mine knew that I was going in, and she phoned. And I answered the call, and it was Carla, the same Carla that showed up at my door 16 years earlier. And I told her the results, and I started to cry. I hung up the phone and I sat in the car, and I don't know how much time passed, but when my eyes cleared from the tears and my hands stopped shaking, I made the 15-minute drive home. And I pull into my garage, and Brent is working on the other side, and I get out of the car and he takes one look at me. He puts down what he's doing. He walks over, he wraps his arms around me, and he says, "We'll get through this together. Focus on the what and trust the how will follow." Next slide. Fortunately for me, my treatment plan did not require chemotherapy or radiation, but I did undergo 4 surgeries in 2.5 months, culminating with a double mastectomy. And during all of these recovery times, I had a lot of time to think and engage with my daughter and my mom, who had come out to visit. And when my mom came out to visit, she brought these 3 large scrapbooks with her, and it contained newspaper clippings and cards and photos from the various events that had taken place surrounding Chris's murder. And she gave these to Alexis. So as Alexis started to read this history, there was some conflicting information. So because there was a 6-day manhunt, what was reported in the media was not always what actually happened, and that came out as evidence in the trial. So when Alexis was growing up and asking me questions, I told her what was learned at the trial. And so she's saying that there's discrepancies between what she's reading in the newspaper and then what I had told her. And so while I'm in bed and she's sitting beside me having these conversations, I wasn't able to employ a lot of the self-care tools that I had typically because I was immobile. So I couldn't go and do vigorous exercise. I couldn't go out for long walks in nature. And it was February, so out here it's pretty cold and don't want to. But the things that I normally engaged in, I wasn't able to access. And so feelings are coming up again in me. And in an effort to try to process them, I turned to writing. And so it was through this journaling exercise in my desire to process what I was feeling that I realized that I had come a long way since Chris's murder, and I'd learned a lot along the way. Next slide. And so I assemble all of these things in my book, Choosing My Tomorrow. And people will often describe resilience as the ability to bounce back after something negative happens to you in your life. And I challenge this idea, and I prefer to say that we bounce forward. We are not the same person we were before we experienced the thing. We are bringing our experiences and our knowledge and hopefully our maturity to the present. And all of this factors into the way that we approach situations and the perspective or the lens we have when we view the world. And so we can't go back to who we were before the thing. So I say, let's not try. Instead, let's take our experiences and use them as fuel to bounce forward and choose better. And so I want to leave you with a challenge to think about what is the what that is guiding you right now. And I firmly believe that each one of us is whole, capable, resourceful, and creative. And we have the power within to make choices and decisions that lead us to where we want to go. So we can choose our tomorrow. And I encourage you to sit in your lazy boy chair, maybe stare off into the distance, maybe with a drink in your hand, and picture your future and allow yourself the space and the opportunity to dream. And remember, focus on the what and trust the how will follow. And this slide just shows on my website, I have taken the 11 lessons learned and I break them down into some self-reflective questions. And I offer that on my website for free if you want to do a little bit of self-reflection and awareness. And if you'd like to contact me, my information is there as well.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.